that being said, I could probably talk about tea all day too. Not because it's tasty, but like you said, lots of herbal benefits and just adding variety. I am of the belief that food is medicine and movement and herbs are their aid. What we're talking about today, though, is movement.
Well said.
So that being said, one of our viewers actually asked a question that aligned with a lot of what my question was as well, which is, how do we keep our super clear focus aligned with our fitness goals amidst a noise or a field of noise of shoulds? How do you pick your must? What do you know your must should be or is?
So you're saying in this specific environment?
In this specific environment, or just in general, even before our current experience, so many of us felt clouded with shoulds. I should move my body, but I don't want to, or I should move my body, but it's not my highest priority. So how do you keep a super clear focus on your movement goals when there's all this other shoulds? Like, I should move my body, but work comes first, or kids come first, or I'm exhausted and I want to watch that show.
Right. I think that really it comes down to identification of what those things are. And in other words, they're all classified shoulds and musts, and ultimately everything is a should. There's almost nothing out there that doesn't have some reasoning behind it, why it worked for somebody. Whatever the should is, somebody's asking you to do something. Well, now that's a should. You should, provide that now to that person that asked you to do them a favor, or asked you to watch this TV show, or whatever it is, or these competing ideas like, you should have margarine, no, you should have butter, those kinds of things. So when you realize that the list of shoulds isn't a big thing to crank through and get through everything, it's really a filtration process to classify the things that are truly musts. In other words, it's trues and falses. It's like positive, negative, things that you absolutely have to do and things that you don't have to do. Everything that you should do, another way to look at that is things that you don't yet have to do because you've decided. So really it comes down to not just hearing it from somewhere else, something that you read on a website or from the news or whatever that somebody told you, and then it's automatically a must because it's somebody else's should for you. Examine it at face value at first and look more deeply into it and say, does it align with all of my other purposes? Does that fit me and my lifestyle and my health? And if it's true, if it passes all of your criteria, then maybe it becomes a must to you and you add it to your list. Otherwise, it's just what I call a target of opportunity. If I get all of my musts done in a day, then I start to look at my TOO, targets of opportunity, things that I can do that I have time for and I've selected that are valuable enough to do, but they're not must do's. So the things that you apply yourself to a must should be something that you've made a clear distinction ranks higher in your life for the purposes you specifically serve, not something that's generically good to everybody. There's things that are, generally good, but then there's things that are higher priority to you that come first.
You definitely touched on a couple of different sub-subjects that I wanted to get into on there as well. That was definitely, a lot of what I expected to hear from you, but it's always good to hear it again. I picked up on, I like the TOO. What was that again?
Target of opportunity.
Target of opportunity versus the shoulds. Like, I should do this or I should do that. Why not turn it into a list of opportunities versus, wouldn't it be great if I had the time to do this thing I should do, right?
Right.
So that was wonderful. You touched on aligning with the purpose of your higher self. Well, shouldn't all of us have some kind of a movement purpose?
Movement, yeah, that should be integrated in there. That doesn't have to be part of your higher purpose, but it will serve it. In other words, like, if you're talking about physical movement, if you're an NFL player or a ballerina, then movement is part of your higher purpose. Like if that's who you are, right? If that's your job in life, if you're a trainer, okay. But let's say you're just a writer and you would go, no, exercise is for fitness people. I'm a writer, so I'm bound to this desk. No, fitness and health and movement is for everyone. It may not be your higher purpose directly, but you need to find a way to give your body the bare minimum, which is a lot more than you think, to feed it what I call vitamin M movement. You need to have enough of that to even be the best writer you can be. or the best teacher or the best coach or the best mom or the best garbage person, whatever your job is. You need a certain amount of fitness and movement just to stay healthy, to be at your best, to be able to serve everyone that's in your life.
That was cool. The vitamin M is super important, and that is absolutely going to be my newest hashtag. So vitamin M, everyone, vitamin movement. Those of you that know me know I am a staple for motion is lotion, so I will absolutely agree with that. One of the things I want to ask though is, you said the minimum movement for just barely living, like everyone needs to get that in during the day. What would you recommend running into the why question or the motivation question? Well, I work out when I'm motivated, I'm just not always motivated. Or why should I work out when my job is pretty physical already? So I know that's kind of a two-part question there, but how to seek motivation or how to keep moving even if you're not motivated, and also why move outside of my regular routine.
Okay. I'll get to the first one first, and then you can re-ask the second one so I remember it clearly. That's something that I've struggled with as a trainer my whole career, is to try to get people to understand the misperception of motivation, that you never want to try to create your fuel tanks for your journey of what you're trying to do with motivation. It is a crappy fuel to use. It doesn't work. That's a way you can start something new. You get motivated, you begin a journey. You don't stay motivated through any journey. It doesn't work that way. If you look at if you go into some hard stories that people have, overcome some, insurmountable goals and gotten through some hard times and major challenges, and they've changed themselves. They didn't do it through long periods of constant motivation. So motivation is something that you can use as a spark, and it can boost what you're already doing. But you need to be in a state of, self-imposed inspiration, which means that you might not be motivated, but you can still have the choice that you've already made before that moment to do what you're about to do. In other words, one version of myself, I get up in the morning and I go, I'm not motivated to take a cold shower this morning. I'm not motivated to do 50 push-ups. There's all these things I can look to myself and go, true or false? Am I in the mood for this? Do I feel like doing it? And a lot of times the answer is going to be no. And that's where you become very average or sub-average if you're going by motivation. That's why there's like an 80% drop off on gym memberships after February or something, is because the motivation is so very temporary. So the point that you need to make to yourself is that your outcomes are going to be based on choices that you made to do things that are valuable to you, and even valuable maybe to somebody else, that has value beyond the moment of doing it for the moment. So you've decided to work out, be healthy, eat healthy, build a house, go on some quest to help somebody. You do it for the outcome and what you want more than what's going on in that moment. You want something that you believe in and you can see through to the end. So with or without motivation, with or without being in the mood for it, you're willing to work on it. I just saw some kind of notification that my internet's unstable. I've never seen that before. Am I okay? Do I have good video?
You did glitch there for a minute, but it resolved pretty quickly as well. So I don't think it'll be a problem, but just keep our eyes on it. I'll let you know if you end up doing anything funky again.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, that was definitely a great insight into motivation. I liked what you said about it, maybe being a launching pad of a place to start, but not some kind of fuel you should expect to carry you through the entire journey. A decision and somewhat discipline is, I think, more of what you're saying is what's going to get you there, that it's not necessarily about having to find motivation, but just having to have a stronger deciding factor that made you want to, work out and take care of yourself to begin with.
Yeah. Don't make your decision in the moment that you have to do something. If you're on a staircase, you don't make a decision stair after stair after stair whether you're going to finish the staircase. You decided at the beginning of the staircase to get to the top of the staircase. Each step on the way up on that staircase is not an independent decision. You've already chosen to get to the top of the staircase, climb the damn staircase.
Right.
So it's a choice you've already pre-made. Just do it, just execute it, and stick with it. It doesn't matter what you do along the way, how hard the top of the staircase feels, just keep climbing. You've already made the choice. You know it was the right choice to be upstairs. Just go get there and stay with your plan.
I love it. But Keith, my job is super physical. Like, I am a fitness trainer. I'm showing people how to work out all day. Isn't that enough?
Right. Yeah, I've gotten that before, and that's actually a really good argument. And I used to, kind of get painted into a corner thinking, wow, that's really good. If this person, if they're in pain and they're tired at the end of the day and they don't have energy and they're weak, and it's all these things that I think I can help with, but they're so physical already in their job, it logically makes sense that they would say, well, I can't work out. I don't have the time. I don't have the physical energy. I'm already really physical. But here's the thing is that our bodies in everyday life, if you don't prescribe any fitness to it, if we don't apply some extra challenge, your body, whether you're relatively lethargic or you have a moderate amount of activity or you have a high amount of activity, if your only input and your only challenge to your body is your everyday life, your body adapts to that level, right? So whether you're here or here, your body will adapt to that level. And that level is that you're setting is the hardest day that you have. In other words, you'll be addressing the needs that your body is going through and the challenges it faces on your hardest days. You'll be prepared for those hardest days, or I should say actually your average days. I said that wrong, because it all gets averaged out. All of the challenges in your everyday life get averaged out. So your hardest days will feel hard because they're a little beyond the average. Does that make sense? So you will only ever be as prepared as you can be with everyday life, even if, let's say, you're like a carpenter, because that was one guy I was working with and having trouble conceptualizing this with. So he's going to be as fit as his everyday life, which is fitter than the average person, but he won't be fit for his hardest day, right? So eventually he's going to have a day harder than he's used to, and then all of a sudden that's going to break him down. So I like to employ what I call the eclipse factor, which means that if you in the gym challenge yourself with things that are applying and challenging you with more strength than is required in your everyday life, and more mobility that will ever be asked of you in your everyday life, and more stamina and more stability. And in other words, if you expand all of the different thresholds that your body could be challenged with, and you do that beyond, even just a little bit, beyond your hardest day in everyday life, then you will adapt to that and you'll be strong. You'll be challenged most in the gym, but then when you go to everyday life, even your hardest day will be easier than your average workout, and you'll be more than prepared. In other words, you'll have more gas in the tank and you'll be more armored up against any potential injuries. So you'll be less at risk to fatigue yourself or to harm yourself at work. And then you'll have more, gas in your tank to go on and do it the next day.
So I'm definitely liking the eclipse factor. It's a good way to explain the concept you're talking about, making sure that what you do in your fitness time makes you stronger than any of the physical challenges life is going to throw at you, so that you don't end up injuring yourself. Kind of makes fitness pain-proof, right?
Right. Pain-proof, injury-proof. You don't want to be, in other words, barely getting by. Like if the heaviest thing you lift at your job is 50 pounds and you lift that just once a week, the practice that you've done to get to that is just the other days where you barely got by lifting 50 pounds. So that doesn't sound like a sustainable plan. That's like Russian roulette right there. So it'd be better to, in that analogy, have somebody lift 60 pounds twice a week in the gym. And then when they go to do 50 pounds at work, they're going to be fine, right? Don't just barely skate by.
Yeah, I hear ya. For those of you that have heard it, I love movement because it's done things like make every bit of furniture in my house lighter. So yeah. I don't feel like I will ever get beat up by a couch or a crock pot again, as long as I continue to train my body. Just a little side plug there for functional training. All right. Let's I want to take it back and talk a little bit more about motivation in terms of self-talk. So many of us run into this, I believe you've called it like monkey brain or baby brain conundrum in the past, where we have this big plan, or we, align our schedule, and we know we work out Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. But that workout time comes on Tuesday, and the inside monkey or baby brain, if you will, starts throwing its tantrum. What kind of advice can you give me or anyone else about self-talk in those scenarios?
Well, give me a specific example of how that would manifest. Give them an example of what that would be like so they can relate to if they've had something similar.
Absolutely. So my husband and I both just talked about this. Even as a fitness trainer, I run into doing this myself, where it's workout time. I know once I work out, I will feel better. I know once I even start, I will crave more and more and more. But the starting point, my body just throws this little tantrum, sits on the floor halfway down the stairs, turns around, goes back for the thing that we forgot that we didn't really need. And I hear this little voice like, well, we could do it later, or didn't we do this yesterday? That stuff's heavy.
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of self-talk, aside from just me continually telling myself like, shut up and do it, can you recommend, or how would you approach that conundrum, or have you had that experience?
Yeah, we all have that actually. And the first thing to notice about that, I would say more than half the battle is just being aware that that's going on, right? Understanding that our psychology isn't as simple as just what we want to do. I've seen people of all ages, every age that you can be as an adult, struggle with that and not realize that there's different parts to our psyche, that what we want isn't just that simple. There's different parts of us that want different things, right? So there's what we want that's actually important, that are things that are like our deeper meaning and deeper thinking side, that's actually wanting the greater good for ourselves, the greater good for the world around us, to do greater work. That's the true us, and those are the bigger decisions that we made, and those usually lead us to harder decisions and harder choices and harder work, right? But then there's always the baby within us that's always going to want the easy way. It's always going to want what's familiar. It's always going to want comfort. It's always going to want to say no to something that's challenging or different. So that's always going to be there. It's always there for me. Every time I take a cold bath or a cold shower, that voice is there for me too, saying, nope, not today. Don't do it. Don't do it. Do something else. Put it off just another minute. Find something else to do. Don't get in that cold water. Maybe not today. Maybe we'll do it tomorrow. All that. And it's there. Just first of all, know that it's going to be there and it's going to talk to you, and know that that's not the true you. Just know that that's a side of you. Okay. And you can't make it all the way go away, but you don't want to just listen to it all the time, right? There's going to be times where we listen to it, and that's okay. But when it's a time that conflicts with something that you set up special, a decision that you've already made for yourself, you're the adult. That's the baby. You're carrying the baby through this. You're in charge, not it, right? Don't let the baby take the steering wheel and steer you through the situation, this plan, this decision that you've made. The baby didn't make the workout, right? You made the workout. You made the investment in that. You made the plan for yourself to do the training, to do the plan, to get in better shape, to be healthy. That's your plan. The baby just wants to go back to bed, and that's not going to get anybody anywhere. So when you have identified that that's going on, that's when you know when it's conflicting with your greater needs and your decisions that you've made. That's the time to ignore that voice, know that your true voice is still there, listen to that, and do what you went to do, whatever it was.
That's a great point, and I like that a lot. Like especially the recognize it's happening being the first step. So many of us probably do recognize it's happening, and we think that a part of us is inadequate because we have this thing in our head that is saying like, man, don't do it. But what you're saying is, we all kind of fight that, and it's about how you engage into it. It's a matter of practice, right? That's going to, over time, make the adult voice maybe a little bit stronger. Yes. I guess my next question to you would be, what kind of language do you maybe use to talk that down or get it done? Is it firm, or is it, do you even engage at all, or do you, how does that work for you in your head?
For me, the voice isn't so much one of, verbal dictation where I'm actually coming up with words. In other words, it's more of a feeling of authority that you are making the choice, that you're feeling the empowerment. Without the baby voice there, it doesn't really feel like a victory. It doesn't feel like you did something big. You just did your plan, right? But when you know that there's this like protest, this resistance that's stopping you from doing something good, and you get through that, you go, no, I'm in charge here, and you do it. So that's the feeling that I'm going for. That's what I rely on, is my will. That it's like, that's your time. If it was easy, everybody would do it and it wouldn't be challenging, right? So when you're doing something that's really meaningful, that's a good sign that you're onto something, is that you have to meet that inner protest going on with yourself. So that's when I dig in and I reaffirm my will for what I set out to do. And that's an opportunity to apply that. And then how good do you feel knowing it's like, yes, I did that. And then it gets easier. You get more empowered with further opportunities as they arise. You start to identify those and go, I've done this before. I know how to get through this. I know how to overcome that voice inside me telling me to, be comfortable. I know I should not be comfortable. I know I can be uncomfortable and do this and get it done. And then you'll know that you can rely on yourself. You're developing self-worth, self-trust, self-empowerment. That's how it's done, is not by giving yourself positive thoughts and positive messages of just, words, but actually employing your will and seeing it come to fruition through your work and your as you said, discipline.
It's all good stuff. It's, making me feel like I need to go work out right now, which is, or more empowered to ignore that sensation, if so, kind of like what you're calling it, of I don't want to, and tune into that empowering sensation of, but I will, but I can, and I, must, to some sense. Vanessa and Vanita, I'm sure the two of you are feeling me on that. Let's go hit it with some more movement as avid movers of mine. I do have a couple more questions for you. One of them would be kind of along the lines of what we've been talking about. What would be, if you had to sum up in like 60 seconds or less, one thing you would say to someone who maybe fell off the fitness wagon, it's been a couple of months, and they're not sure how to get back into it, or quote unquote, if they even
can? Would this be for like psychological reasons, that it wasn't anything physical?
Yes. Well, let's talk more psychological than physical, because physical would be a whole different ball game of, making sure functionality is there and such. But that, just sticking with that mental battle of like, it was winter time, and a lot of us stop moving as much in the winter time because we're like outdoorsy sports people or whatever. Say it's been 4 months. I had a New Year's plan. I did it for a week. It's right. April. Gotcha. I'm finally thinking, or May, like, yeah, I should start moving my body again. But I already like dropped the ball on that. I'll probably do it again. What would you say to me in 60 seconds to try and turn that around and, get me moving again?
I would say, first of all, just start from the beginning. Give yourself the grace to, realize it's not, don't think of it as starting over like you messed up or something. It would be just going back to, the starting line, and give yourself a fresh start, and maybe, look at it a little bit differently, figure out what different, didn't work the first time that you could do differently, and redesign your goals, be clear about what you're doing this for, and have a clear beginning. Don't worry about so much about just the goals or what you think working out in the program should look like. Start with something you can do immediately. What does the first step look like? So start to design those first workouts or those first days, the first couple of weeks. Get a plan that actually is accessible and realistic to you, and just get the ball going. We just need traction in the beginning. So physically, you need to get moving. And psychologically, you need something that you can hold on to that makes sense to you, not something abstract like I should be in better shape or lose weight, something specific that means something to you.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that now? I know I asked you to give me a spiel in 60 seconds, but I was kind of hoping you'd say that, because that I so often run into very surfacey goals when I hear about why do you want to work out? Things to the effect of, well, I know I need to lose weight, or I know it's for my health. And you've always taught me to dig deeper to find more feeling, emotion behind it. Because once you've had that feeling there, you're more tied to actually committing to it versus just like, yeah, I know I need to, but like, meh.
Right.
So elaborate on that a little bit for me. Like what kind of questions would you ask yourself or would you ask someone to try and find that meaning in movement, that connection to why I need to move my body?
Yeah, you just like you said, you need to make it personal. It's not enough to know theoretically that you're supposed to work out and that's the right thing to do because you'll be healthy and you'll be in better shape if you do that. That's not why anybody keeps working out. Though the reason that you're going to stay working out is if you have a personal motivation, not just in the beginning, but you have something that drives you that you can go back to and remember why you do this, that there's a purpose specifically to you, not to all of mankind, that it's good to exercise and get your vitamin M. That's a nice benefit, but you need your own personal purpose that you're looking for. So you need to spend some time doing some introspective thought on, what is it that you would start working out for? If you do, I talk to all my clients this way. I say, what are your short-term goals? And they usually say some vague things. And once we get there and I say, okay, once we've accomplished all that, because you're going to, what's going to keep you doing this a year from now and over a year from now? What would make it worth it to you to be in here still doing this 2-3 times a week, maybe at home over a year from now? What could be good enough to make it worthwhile? What's valuable enough in your life to fight for, to keep, or to gain that you don't already have? And once you've identified that, those are the people that you see working out for decades or for their lifetime.
From age 8, right?
7.
For those of you that might not know a little bit about Keith, I love to always pick his background, but he fell in love with fitness at a very young age, and he has been a fitness trainer for, oh, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong here, Keith, but most of my life, at least over 25 years. And, he is very much a movement genius. That's why I'm sitting here with him and picking his brain. I want to switch gears a little bit here and ask you what your favorite success story is working with someone else and getting them moving. Yeah, your favorite. I've heard a lot of them over the years, but I want to know if you have like top 2 even.
It's going to be hard to not be biased by the ones that are more recent. I'll try to go back deeper just for the sake of going back deeper. Okay, so when I first moved to Fort Collins, I was just trying to establish myself as a trainer around here. That would have been around the year 2001, so the year of 9/11, and that was very interesting because literally on the day of 9/11, I was scheduled to go into work, and shortly after I got the news and all of that was coming down on all of us and how we all felt about that, the world was paralyzed. It's like we never seen anything like this. We were ready to just keep watching the news all day. And I got the call from my client that I'm talking about. His name was Hal. And so we discussed, what should we do? We want to just cancel? Shouldn't we cancel and just grieve? And we'd been grieving for hours at this point already. And, we kind of both arrived at the decision that, if we stay inside and we're crippled by this, the bad guys win. That the best thing that we could do is be the free people that we are and live our lives. And that's what we did. So I went to work and I trained him. And at the time, Hal was probably in his mid 80s. Okay. And when he came to me, he was like a lot of older people that are at that age where, especially at that time, a lot of those people weren't in the fitness culture in that era to be exposed to weight training. So they really hadn't done much besides bicycling or swimming or something, just generic exercise, right? But nothing really weight training. And he was a guy that had very real concerns about, I can't really get up out of a chair anymore. He's a guy in his 80s. He's lost a lot of muscle mass and he's lost a lot of strength, but the most wonderful gentleman. I mean, like if you just roll all of your archetypes of what you see in movies about like the wise old, sweet old guy, I mean, he's just the most precious, coolest guy. And I loved my time with him. And we started working out together. And like I said, he couldn't even really get up out of a chair very well. He needed always help and stuff like that. So he had weak legs and it was expected and understandable. And the thing is, with older folks as a trainer, it's really easy to soft glove them, and that was the approach that I always kind of detested in my fellow trainers, was to be so easy and so soft on these older people. Got to be all delicate, they're going to break, and they'd always hand them the 2-pound weights. We're going to have you sit so you can't hurt yourself. Just sit there and don't move, and just move those little 2-pound weights. And I found that to be so tedious, and it's not going to change them. And I knew that really what he needed was a change. He needed to really ignite something different in his body and build his bone density, build his range of motion, build his strength. And I gave him some real weights, and we just started doing some basic, squats with a heavy dumbbell. And heavy for him at the time, I think it was like 20 pounds, and even just his body weight. And we had to do all these things where we did just negatives, where he's just kind of plopping, because that's all he could do is kind of plop. So we did all these negatives and months of that. He did a lot of that over time. And next thing I knew, he was going from like a 1-foot plop to like a 6-inch plop to, just a couple inches. And then eventually he could sit down to the bench. He could actually control his way down into a squat all the way to a bench, which was probably, like most chair height, like about, maybe 16 inches, which is pretty good for an average person, like an average young person, to be able to squat to that depth. And then he started adding weight to that. And next thing you knew, he was up to, 30, 40, 50, 60, we did 60 something pounds. So he was like squatting full depth, 60 pounds, and people would walk into the room and be like, is that Hal? Look at him squat, So it was like a complete turnaround. So this goes back to the eclipse factor, is like, can Hal get out of a chair now? Yeah, he could jump out of a chair. He could get out of his chair with 60 pounds on his lap if he needed to. So he was so over prepared for whatever life would give him. And, fast forward 10 years, I'm still training him. He hasn't come in a little while because he's actually, got some other health problems, but the guy's, mid late 90s now. I think he's like 96 or something, still around. He carried that strength with him, and him being around me, like, was a great billboard for me. People would come up to me and they'd be like, how old is that guy? He's that old. He's so strong, so people were just always amazed. He was such a great illustration of functional training, because he started so late, but he picked up so much in such a short period of time, and it changed the function of his life. That's why it's called functional fitness. He can now move around the house, do all the things that he would want to do, and not be bound by fatigue and weakness and pain. So yeah, Hal's definitely one of my favorite success stories of all time.
That was a really good one. Thank you for sharing that with us. I love the stories of the comeback. Having my own comeback story from, I can definitely empathize with that kind of a journey, and sticking with it is huge. So that was definitely amazing. And at any age, you can make that comeback. And I love that. You are never too old or too young to move your body for all the benefits it's going to give you. I'd like to kind of wrap up with one, maybe two more topics. Totally switching gears again. Let's talk about heart rate. There is a lot of stuff out there about our heart rate. There's a lot of knowledge about, where is a healthy heart rate? Where should your heart rate be? I know for me personally, I have a naturally very low resting heart rate, but that means like the more maybe normal elevated heart rates actually can be a little bit more dangerous for me. I can get really lightheaded faster, or have to assume a recovery position. And I know many other, I'm sure, of our listeners or people that would be interested in this topic have varying experiences with their own heart rate. How do you know, one, what is safe for your heart rate? And do you have any recommendations on different sensations that you might feel in maybe your body to know, are you overdoing it or are you not pushing it enough?
Yeah, the best answer to that question is just to start with that the whole heart rate scale is basically a ballpark. It's basically a way to give you general zones of where averages are for people. So because they're based on averages, it's not going to be an absolute formula for anybody to know where their barriers are and what's safe for them. So it's just meant to be a guide to know that where you definitely shouldn't be or where you definitely need to be to actually be productive. But to know, the biggest question that you asked that's the most important to start is what's safe. And the only way to know for an individual what's safe is to talk with your doctor. So, and especially if you have any abnormalities, and by abnormality, I don't just mean, if you have a pathology. If you have something wrong with your heart, you'd obviously know, and you'd want to know the specific answers to that. of course, that's going to already change the formula. But you might just have things like you were talking about, somebody that might have higher or lower blood pressure or higher or lower heart rates. I have clients that are all over the board with that. And then immediately all of that, those formulas and those charts go out the window because those percentages don't even apply to them because they're so far off from that. So that doesn't mean that you go, well, I seem to be more tolerant, so maybe I should push it a little bit more. It's like, it's more of the reverse. It's like you want to use that as kind of a safety net to make sure, like, okay, I know my numbers are, you know, showing that I should be stopping here, but I feel okay. You know, you want to use that kind of as a guideline to know the, like I said, the ballpark of where you should be. And if you want more specific answers, you should definitely talk with your doctor and figure out where, if you're training specifically for something hard, or if you're just finding yourself not feeling well while you're working in the garden or in the heat or something, you want those questions answered by a medical professional that's specifically assigned to you as an individual. As far as the other zones that we're talking about, the two ways that I will, you know, fitness test people would be, and this is a way that you can even apply to yourself if you know the heart rate zones. Taking that formula of 220 minus your age equals your 100%. You never go to 100%. 90 to 100 is what they consider red line, which is like, it's what it sounds like. That's the scary place that you're not supposed to be, that people go anyway because they figure I'm above average. You know, it's not what you're supposed to do. It's supposed to be more dangerous and more taxing on your body and your, you know, respiratory or your cardio system. So that's the kind of thing where if that's ever done, that's usually by like Olympic athletes that are training for biathlon or something like that, or swimming. And then just below that is going to be your anaerobic zone, which is 80 to 90%. And that's going to be your system that's going to use everything but oxygen. That's why it's called anaerobic. So it's going to use all of your other chemical systems without being too scientific. That will be like the short-lived thing. That's why you can only sprint for about a minute, you know. So it's when you're doing battle ropes, when you're doing burpees and things like that, that's anaerobic. When you hit a quick wall, you know, that's anaerobic. So you don't really have to measure that. It's just, that just explains why you're in that zone. It's like, okay, cyclists want to know exactly where, I mean, I had a guy that he trained with me for years, and he trained in cycling for years, and he knew exactly his heart rate, where he would drop off. He knew exactly where his anaerobic threshold would be, and he would stay aerobic, because when you're aerobic, it's more efficient because now you're using oxygen, which isn't the chemical process, and you don't get as burned out, and you can go on for hours that way. And then there's a level down below that, which is even more efficient. So if that was, we were like 80 to 90 for anaerobic, 70 to 80 for aerobic, and then below that is just like lower levels. So you're still exercising at those levels. You're just more, they say, oh, that's the fat burning zone. It's like, trust me, you're burning fat when you're doing aerobic activity anyway. So that's just all kind of trivial, but it's more of a guideline of where not to go. And then like, if you're specifically trained for sports, knowing which you really belong in. If you're a wrestler, if you're training for a short burst, you want to train as much time in intervals in the anaerobic zone. And then pretty much every other sport, you'd be training in the aerobic zone. But if you're not training for a specific sport where you need endurance, there's really no need to be pushing upward into that chart. So in other words, don't worry about trying to push high. Try to back it down and do more of the, you know, the safe zone, and get into more like the, you know, 70% range, and that should do you good. But if you're not feeling right and the numbers aren't matching, you know, what you're feeling, then maybe talk with your doc. The other thing would be, I think it's called the perceived exertion test or something like that. And then there's like a talk test. So it really comes down to, if you're doing a certain activity and you just stop, if you've done the activity for a couple minutes and you just stop and you try to talk, you know, how do you feel, number one? And then how easily can you carry on a conversation? If you can talk like this, then you're, you know, you're clearly in a zone where you're being very efficient. You're spending energy, but you're being so efficient with it that it's not fatiguing you. But if you can only get a few words in within phrases and you have to breathe in between, now you're kind of pushing that upper envelope. But somebody's really bonking if they can only get a word in between each breath, right? So that's just kind of a metric, you know, that you can quickly, easily apply to get an idea of like where you're at in the scale of exertion.
Yeah, that was all wonderful. That was definitely a lot of in-depth into just kind of some general safe heart rate stuff in terms of, how you want that to reflect in exercise. Yes, definitely, know yourself and make sure you're always talking to your doctor about how your body feels, especially with movement. So really wonderful advice there, Keith. Just to wrap it up here today, I would love it if there's anything you have to add or anything you would like to share with our moving audience out there. All of our movers, our shakers, our money makers, if you will, because they're all out there, trying to find ways to keep their bodies moving and grooving in this strange time. So what, maybe if anything, can you tell them to keep that momentum going?
Sure. Yeah, I'll answer that. And then while I'm talking, feel free to throw any questions into the chat box there if you have any questions for me. But general advice for people right now trying to stay active. I've been emphasizing whenever I get together with people that so much of what we're doing right now because of quarantine, if you're one of the lucky people to be essential, then wonderful. I'm so glad that you stay active. The rest of us, we've had so much of our normal inputs of challenge and connectivity removed. So we have to seek that out a little bit more, and getting out and moving and doing things with purpose is more important than ever. I mean, it's important in everyday life, but now it's probably like triple or quadruple important because it's not just about our muscles. This isn't just about our muscles staying strong or staying fit. It's not just about cardiovascular activity. It's about our chemistry, because when we're inside more, just being out, not outside as much and not having as much sunlight and not having as much fresh air, and even the lack of stimulus from the outside world, it makes it harder for our bodies to keep us, emotionally and mentally healthy. So that's a big part of it. Is in other words, without getting into the threat of why this is a problem, just know that it's important to keep yourself challenged and entertained. So do whatever you can inside and out, and have fun in your house, have fun in your garden. Get out on the trails, go to the parks, whatever you can. Social distancing, check, plus, sure. But that doesn't mean stop living. That means you need to work a little harder and live more than usual. You need to get out there and move and have fun. Make it interesting. Have fun with your family that's within the household, but have fun on your own. Find things that give you purpose, because there's a mental component to this. Your body and your mind are connected, and it's really important in these months that are coming up to maintain our mental health through these strange times, and making your body and your mind connected through purposeful, intentional activity is paramount.
So it looks like Bree has a couple of questions here, Keith. I do appreciate you saying all of that. All of that is definitely helpful, and I think what people need to be hearing is make movement a priority and move when and where you can. Again, motion is lotion, rest is rest. Don't do the resting in terms of like sitting and atrophying into your couch. There is a time and place for recovery, which is a different than just kind of rest.
Right.
And in tangent on Kaitlyn's part. So Bree did have a couple of questions. Her first is, what is your favorite exercise to do?
Jeez. It really depends on the situation. If we're talking favorite, so I'm going to be as literal as I can. Favorite, meaning like, what do I love to do? Man, I have so many. That's a hard one. They're all so fun. I have my favorites. Gosh, I never really like tuned in if there was one favorite. But I could probably narrow it down. You can see it's not easy. I would say one of the most satisfying things is probably like the clean and press, because it just does so much. It's not necessarily the best. That's a different answer. What's the best exercise? What's the most effective and efficient? And there's all these other things. But my favorite, I know it does so much good for me. I know what I feel in my body. I'm so tuned into my body. I know when an exercise is like, oh, that's just working my shoulders, as opposed to like, oh, that's working my whole body. Oh, I actually got cardio out of that. And then there's some exercises that give you this kind of like pump, like not just in your muscles, but you actually feel this like energy kick after you've done it. You just kind of feel like, yeah, let's fight. It kind of turns you up a bit, So the clean and press is such a holistic movement. I use so much of my body to do it. It's so, vigorous. And when I'm doing it, after I've done it, I just feel more alive. And I know, having done it, and even while I'm doing it, no matter how hard it is, I know all the various parts of me that it's feeding with goodness. You know, it's just such a great exercise. So that's my favorite, I guess.
I could see that. I could see that because I feel like I see you do that often when we're at the studio. So,
that's cool.
That being said, one of my very favorites and what I am missing very dearly is anything hanging from the bar. So shrugs, jackknives, the dead hang, attempted pull-ups, if you will, or assisted, either way, just that like good bar work. I, remember my first time getting like my chin over the bar and just thinking like, I am a freaking superhero. Like, this is as close as I get to flying. So I have struggled a little bit without access to a bar, but I did get my hands on a bar I was able to hang on the other day, and that felt really good. So that being said, let's wrap it up with a question about cold showers. And this might not necessarily be a training question, but since you have been on this Wim Hof Ice Man journey of your own, what I know from just what I've studied with some hydrotherapy with our good friends from Eden Valley, what contrast showering can do for the body. And that is when you do, your alternating shower. You do cold for a period and then hot for a longer period. It's, I believe they call it a 3-to-1 ratio. So like 3 minutes hot, 1 minute cold, and alternate that at least 3 times. I know a lot of what that does from a scientific standpoint is it turns on your immune system by breaking loose your white blood cells from their barrier that they're kind of stuck in on the blood vessel wall lining. But I know there's also more layers to it that you've been diving into deeper with your studies of cold showering and what that cold impact does to the body. So take just a couple of minutes, if you could, and elaborate on that for us.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And first, I just want to start off by saying I do both. I believe in all of the extremes and all the in-betweens of hydrotherapy and thermal therapy. I think that it all has some really good benefits individually, like those individual pieces. And one alone to me isn't enough when they're also accessible. The great thing is you can do it at home, especially in our colder environment here. There's people living, in warm enough environments that they're cold water out of the tap. It might feel cold, but it's not the kind of cold that's going to trigger this immune response. And the way I like to think of it, the way that you're putting the science there, which is true, is like I always like to think of the effect that is happening is that it's waking all of your soldiers out of the barracks. It's like they're sleeping. You have an army, but so many of these viruses like COVID and stuff, they can sneak in under the radar while your soldiers are sleeping. And that's where our immune system isn't brought to the front line to be ready to go. But this is the kind of stuff so if you're training those soldiers, waking up in the middle of the night, they're ready to go. So both of them have their benefits. And the pure cold, if you're doing longer periods of cold or a cold bath, like an immersion in cold water, it's going to have probably a higher anti-inflammatory effect, which I think is really important. Anything anti-inflammation is just good systemically, right? So yes, it's uncomfortable, but once you get used to it and once you apply your mental, game to it, then it's no big deal. And it's just a few moments of discomfort and then you feel like amazing afterwards. So I do, a rotation of the different systems, and I wouldn't point anybody in one direction only, but I would say the easiest place to start is the contrast shower, because it's like, well, at least I've got part of it down. I know how to take a hot shower. That's familiar. So I think that that's a good kind of like starting line for people, is just to start with the familiar and just mix the cold into what they're already doing. And even when I take a cold shower, it's not purely cold. It's not like I start with a cold shower and just shower cold the whole time. It's a cold shower at the end of a normal shower. And it's a longer time than it would be with the alternating. But the hardest thing is definitely the cold bath, where you're in full, more immersion. So I'm not recommending that to anybody. That's a little more extreme. And there's other things with heat, even like, hot baths, fever baths, and saunas and things like that. I don't even have time to get into that, nor probably should I recommend any of those, because they're getting more extreme. But the cool thing about the contrast showers, it is accessible, and it's just this alternating thing. And you go from feeling really good and warm and woobie to being like cold. So you've just got these little pulses of discomfort, but you get to, you're going back to the warm. So I would start with that. That's why I did the video on that, because I think that's a safe, easy place to start. And then once you've familiarized yourself with that feeling and you feel like, okay, I can do 30 seconds. I could probably do 45 seconds. Then you can nudge your way up, and then you really don't have to do more than a minute or two really to get the benefits. So then if you're feeling, like a real superhero, then you can go for, the longer effects. And I believe that there is like a turning point where you go from 1 to 2 minutes. It does make a difference. So there's things that it does, like I said, more on the anti-inflammatory side. People report different effects from these different things. So I don't target any one of them. I want them all. So it's like I'm just going for, if some of these things happen to this group and some of these things happen to this group, and I know that I keep hearing the same kinds of results, and not everybody gets them, but it's measurable and it's consistent. So it's like I'm just trying. I don't want to just only get one nutrient. It's like that's the same way I eat. I don't want to just get only vitamin C, even if it's good. I want to eat everything. So I'm just trying to get the best of everything. So that's the best answer I can give on that for now.
Well, that was wonderful. If you'd like to dig deeper into any of Keith's knowledge on some of those topics we touched about at the end, especially things like immunity or cold showering, contrast showering, please check out our YouTube page. We are putting all kinds of fun content out there on our YouTube page just to, sneak in little nuggets of motivation here and there, as well as tips and tricks on how to optimize your life, your body, and your tea time with your trainer.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
Keith, thank you for joining me this afternoon. My ginger water was super delicious. I hope your cup was enjoyable as well. For anyone that hung out with us and watched the show, thank you so much for tuning in. It's so wonderful to be able to connect with you in this way and just hang out and have a conversation. If there's something further you have questions about, please shoot us an email. You know where to find us. But take care. Thanks again for joining us on our Tea Day